So now that we have introduced the subject of constitutional and administrative law for the SQE, what we're going to do in this lesson is take a very brief introduction to some of the foundational ideas and concepts associated with constitutional and administrative law. Now, this forms a part of additional content, if you will, background content, foundational content. Not all of this is explicitly cited in the SQE specification. However, if you are somebody who is coming at the SQE from a non-law background, somebody who hasn't done an undergraduate degree in law, then you might be maybe advised that this is information that you want to get your head around first before starting to dive into the actual content. Now, if you're somebody who has got a law degree and has and is now going at the SQE from the perspective of coming from a practice in law, then you might not feel the need to, because we're going to talk about some very basic constitutional ideas. Or if you want to brush up on the material, then of course that is absolutely fine. So the question in this video is, what actually is a constitution? We are studying here constitutional and administrative law. We hear all the time about the Constitution. We might talk about the US Constitution, for example, but we don't have a clear definition. What is the definition of a constitution? Well, a constitution is not just something that is limited to states or to legal systems more generally. You can have constitutions for a whole host of different structures and institutions. So you could have, for example, the constitution of a business, a company constitution. This is something that you'll become familiar with when you look at the business law and practice module for the SQE as well. There are such things as company constitutions. There are also constitutions of political parties. You can go online and you can find the constitutions of various different political parties, maybe ones that you have voted for, maybe ones that you haven't. And you might also find that there are constitutions that exist for clubs and for other groups like that. So sports clubs, for example, or other kinds of clubs of that nature, games clubs as well. So a constitution exists in a variety of different forms and structures and ideas, and also applies to a variety of different structures and institutions. So the first point that I should note is that doesn't really give you a better understanding of what a constitution is, but it gives you an understanding that a constitution is something that exists not just in relation to the idea of constitutional law, the idea of a state. And so fundamentally, what a constitution is a document or some kind of an agreement that outlines the fundamental practice of these such organizations, whether it be a business, whether it be a state, whether it be a club or a political party. The Constitution outlines the fundamental practice of these organizations. When applying this principle to that of a state, the definition is more closely akin to something like a document or a collection of principles which define and outline the fundamental basics of the government, essentially. Another definition of a constitution might be seen when we look at some of the case law. The case here of Crown and the Secretary of State for Foreign and Commonwealth Affairs, the Quark Fishing case from 2006. They make it very clear that any constitution, whether a state, a trade union, a college, a club, or other institution, seeks to lay down and define the main officers in which authority is vested, and the powers which may be exercised or not exercised by the holders of those officers. And so fundamentally then, understanding what this constitution is involves having an understanding of the ideas of power, the ideas of structure, the ideas of the relationship between institutions, the relationship between the institutions of government and the people who elect those governments. All of these things form into this idea of constitutional law. And so a constitution will define the relationship between a number of different institutions and different peoples. It will define the relationship between the people and the state. This is most commonly expressed, should I say, through the idea of human rights. UK human rights law is something that we will spend some time examining, and human rights fundamentally involves the relationship between the people and the state. The state has a number of obligations towards the people to protect their fundamental human rights, to ensure either through positive or negative rights that either they are protected from certain things, freedom from, and they also have the ability to actually perform certain actions without interference, freedom to. And so that's one of the things that we will study in this series of videos. But it also looks horizontally and internally. Not only does it look at the vertical relationship between the state and the people, but it also examines the relationship between the different branches of the government, i.e., for example, the separation of powers, the idea of checks and balances, the idea of judicial review also fits somewhat into this conversation. The Constitution also defines the powers and institutions of each branch of government. So, for example, what are the powers of the judiciary? What is the powers of the legislature or Parliament? What powers does the executive branch have? In our country, what powers does the monarch have? What are known as the prerogative powers? And then finally, the idea of a constitution also outlines the basic principles of the rule of law. We'll spend some time talking about the rule of law in this series of lessons as well.